On the morning of my 38th birthday, my mother knocked on the door of my office, wearing a wool coat I recognized from 9 years earlier, and she asked me for $84,000. I already knew why she'd come before she said a word. What she didn't know was sitting on a shelf 4 feet behind me, a shoebox with 9 birthday cards inside it, every single one marked in her own handwriting, return to sender. Denise, my office manager, buzzed her in without knowing who she was. Why would she? In 6 years of working together, I'd never once mentioned my mother. Denise just saw a woman in her 60s standing in the parking lot off Route 42, next to a gray Buick with a crack running through the bottom corner of the windshield, and figured she had a 9 o'clock. She didn't have an appointment. She had a request. Clara! That's how she opened. Not hi. Not happy birthday. Just my name, the way you'd address someone you needed something from. I stood behind my desk, the Foundry Street blueprint still pinned to the corkboard behind me, Josh's crayon drawing of a bulldozer taped crooked to the filing cabinet, and I didn't sit down right away. Neither did she. She kept her coat on, even though the office was warm, and she held a Kroger bag stuffed with folders against her chest like it might get taken from her. She told me Frank had needed a triple bypass in March. Insurance covered most of it, but not the rehab facility, not the second opinion in Columbus, not the 3 months he couldn't manage his territory for the auto parts company, which meant they'd fallen behind on the house on Larkspur Lane. She said the bank had sent a notice. She said, family helps family, twice in the first 4 minutes, like she was testing which version of that sentence would land better. I offered her coffee. She said she'd take it black, which surprised me, because I didn't actually remember how she took her coffee. Standing there measuring grounds into a filter, it hit me that I hadn't heard her voice in over 2 years. The last contact had been a voicemail I never returned. She'd driven 40 minutes to ask me for $84,000. She hadn't driven 40 minutes in 9 years to ask me anything else. I noticed the small things you notice when you've had a lot of practice noticing. Her nails were done, pale pink, chipped at the thumb. Her wedding ring was loose enough that she kept turning it with her other hand. She glanced once at the framed photo on my desk. Mark, Emma, Josh, and me at the Foundry Street ribbon cutting, and didn't ask a single question about any of them. Not their names, not their ages. She looked at that photo the way you'd look at a stock image that came with the frame. You've done well for yourself, she said, like it was something that had simply happened to me, the way weather happens. I want to tell you what I said back to her, but first you need to understand what was in that shoebox, and why it had taken her 9 years to knock on any door of mine at all. To understand the shoebox, you'd have to go back to a 2-bedroom house on Sycamore Street, and to my father, Robert Ashford, an electrician who did commercial wiring for a contractor out of Grove City. He died in our garage on a Sunday afternoon in September, working on a lawnmower he never got around to fixing, when I was 17. Heart attack. My mother found him. I was the one who called 911 because she couldn't remember our own address for almost a full minute on the phone. For about 2 years after that, it was just the two of us, and it was fine. Not easy. Grief doesn't organize itself politely, but fine. She worked as a dental hygienist. I did homework at the kitchen table while the local news played too quiet to actually hear. We ate a lot of frozen lasagna. I still can't eat it, 30 years later. She met Frank Colton at a co-worker's daughter's wedding, of all places, at a VFW hall off Route 3. He managed a regional territory for an auto parts distributor and had 2 kids from a previous marriage, a son who was mostly grown and already out of the house, and a daughter named Kayla, 14 at the time, 3 years younger than me. They married 11 months later, in June. At a small ceremony I stood up in as a bridesmaid, wearing a dress Frank's sister picked out. We moved into Frank's house on Larkspur Lane a few weeks after because it was bigger, and because, as my mother put it, it made more financial sense. I understood that part. I didn't yet understand what it would cost. I want to be fair to that first year, because it really was mostly fine. Frank wasn't cruel. He was distant in the specific way stepfathers can be when they've decided the easiest path is to let their new spouse handle her side entirely on her own. He paid for my junior class ring without complaint. He came to exactly one of my track meets, stood at the fence with his hands in his pockets, and left before the 4x4 relay. I didn't think much of it at the time. You don't, when you're 16, and your father has been gone less than 3 years, and your mother finally seems happy again. Happy seemed worth almost anything. The thing I understand now, looking back with 38 years instead of 16, is that my mother had made a decision very early in that marriage about which version of peace she was going to protect. It just took a while for that decision to show up in ways I could actually point to. Nothing happened all at once. If it had, it would almost be easier to explain. Instead, it was small things, stacked one on top of another for about 18 months, until the stack got too tall to pretend wasn't there. The first thing was the photo on the mantel. It had been a picture of my dad, my mother, and me at Cedar Point, the summer before he died. Within a few months of the wedding, it was gone, replaced with a professional portrait of the new 5 of us, except it was really 4 of us, because I was standing at the far edge of the frame, half cut off by the photographer's angle, and nobody ever asked for a reprint. The second thing was Thanksgiving of 2009. Frank's extended family did a whole production every year, cousins, a lake house up near Saginaw, 3 kinds of pie. That first year, my mother told me I was welcome to come, but that Aunt Pam, her younger sister, had already invited me to hers, so it probably makes more sense for me to just go there instead. It did make sense, that first year. It became the arrangement for the next 9 Thanksgivings, without anyone ever announcing it as permanent. The third thing was smaller, and somehow it stuck with me more than the others. Frank kept a household calendar on the fridge that tracked what he called family commitments, Kayla's soccer schedule, his work travel, church events. My hardware store shifts weren't on it. My college application deadlines weren't on it. I started writing them in myself, in a different color pen, and within a week they'd usually been erased, the eraser marks smudged gray over the date. Kayla, to her credit, never seemed to enjoy any of it. I want to say that clearly, because this isn't a story about a villainous stepsister. She was 14, then 15, then 16, mostly just trying to get through her own house without incident. The favoritism wasn't really about her. It was about who Frank had decided belonged, and my mother deciding, quietly every single day, not to be the one who disagreed with him. The fourth thing was my high school graduation, which should have been simple. My mother came. Frank came. Aunt Pam sat 2 rows behind them because there weren't enough seats saved. Afterward, there was supposed to be a family dinner at a steakhouse off Route 62. Frank had made the reservation weeks earlier for the whole family. When I got in the car, my mother told me, almost as an aside while she was checking her mirror to back out of the parking lot, that the reservation was actually just for Frank's side, and that she'd figured I'd rather celebrate with Pam anyway. I said that was fine. It wasn't a question. She hadn't asked. It came to a head when I was 19. Frank and I argued about something that shouldn't have mattered. A curfew. A car. I genuinely don't remember which. And my mother didn't take a side so much as she agreed with whichever side kept the peace in the house. Within a month, the conversation had shifted from, let's work this out, to her telling me at the kitchen table, over a pot roast I remember because I never finished it, that maybe it was time I figured things out on my own for a while. I moved into my Aunt Pam's spare room 3 days later with 2 duffel bags and a laundry basket. Here's the part one didn't expect. I genuinely thought it was temporary, a cooling-off period, the kind families haven't come back from. So a few weeks before my 20th birthday, I did something I would keep doing once a year for the next 9 years. I bought a plain card at the CVS on Broadway, a blue envelope, nothing dramatic, and wrote 4 sentences inside. Thinking of you. Hope things are okay at the house. I'll call soon. Love, Clara. I mailed it to Larkspur Lane myself, because I wanted the return address to say mine. 11 days later, it came back. Returned to sender, in blue ballpoint, across the front, in my mother's handwriting. That slanted capital are she used on grocery lists. I'd know it anywhere. I told myself it was a misunderstanding. Maybe Frank intercepted it. Maybe she thought it was something else entirely. The next year, I sent another one. It came back too. By the 5th year mark, the man I was dating by then, who I'd married 2 years later, asked me gently why I kept doing it, since it clearly wasn't going anywhere. I told him I didn't send it for her anymore. I sent it for the version of me that still had a mother, once a year, so that version of me would have something to point to. The 6th year, the envelope came back torn nearly in half, taped crudely back together by the post office with a yellow damaged in transit sticker slapped over the tear, like the postal service had done more to preserve it than she had. The 7th year, It came back stamped no longer at this address, except Aunt Pam confirmed, because she still saw Linda occasionally at church functions, that my mother had lived in that exact house on Larkspur Lane the entire time. The 8th year, nothing was torn. Nothing was stamped wrong. It just came back with the flap resealed slightly crooked, like it had been opened and put back. And I never found out if that one was actually read before it was sent back, or if I only wanted to believe that. 9 years. 9 cards. 9 envelopes with her handwriting on the front, refusing something that had never once asked her for anything. I kept every one of them, in order, in a shoebox on a shelf in my office. That's not a metaphor. It's just who I've always been, long before I had a reason to need it. If you've ever kept the proof nobody thought you'd need, the voicemails, the emails, the cards that came back unopened, hit subscribe, because this channel is full of stories exactly like this one. Now here's what my mother didn't know when she walked into that office on my birthday. She had no idea what those 9 years had actually built. Aunt Pam's spare room had a twin bed and a window that faced the neighbor's above-ground pool, and I lived there almost 2 years while I finished high school and worked 20 hours a week folding towels and mixing paint at the hardware store on Broad Street. I enrolled in the community college's construction management program, mostly because it was affordable and the advisor told me the job placement numbers were good. I liked it more than I expected. A building either stands up correctly or it doesn't. There's no ambiguity in a load-bearing wall. And after the previous few years, I found that kind of certainty like water after a drought. I met Mark in a shared statistics class in the fall of 2012. He was studying electrical, like my dad had been, though I didn't mention that connection until our 3rd date because I didn't want it to be the reason he liked me. We got married in 2014 at the county courthouse on a Tuesday afternoon with Aunt Pam and 2 friends from work as witnesses. Nobody from Larkspur Lane was invited. Nobody asked to be. For a few years, life was just ordinary in the specific way ordinary life feels when you're finally allowed to have it without managing someone else's mood around you. Mark did residential electrical work. I worked estimating and scheduling for a general contractor, and on weekends I started taking small side jobs, a bathroom here, a kitchen there, out of a used Ford pickup with a magnetic sign I made myself at a print shop off Stringtown Road. Emma was born in 2016. Josh came in 2019, and his first winter was rough enough with asthma that we kept a nebulizer running on the kitchen counter for 2 years straight. I started Ashford Design Build in the spring of 2017 with a business checking account, one subcontractor I trusted named Ruiz, and a single client, a dentist who wanted his waiting room redone and liked that I showed up on time and didn't pad the invoice. I filed the LLC paperwork myself at the county recorder's office because I didn't want to pay somebody $200 to fill out a form I could read myself. It wasn't smooth. There was a stretch in 2018 where a supplier delay on a kitchen job nearly cost me the client and the deposit both, and I remember sitting in the truck outside their house doing math on a napkin, trying to figure out if I could afford to eat the loss and still make payroll for Ruiz that month. I could, barely. I learned to build in more cushion after that. We bought a small 3-bedroom on Willow Court in 2018, nothing special. A builder-grade ranch with a chain-link fence and a kitchen I gutted myself over 2 weekends before we moved in. Mark hung a tire swing from the maple tree the week Emma turned 2. I remember the mortgage payment down to the dollar, $941 a month, because for the first 18 months I checked the balance the way some people check the weather, out of habit more than worry. Josh's asthma scared us badly enough in January of 2020 that we spent a night in the ER at the Children's Hospital in Columbus, and I remember standing in that hallway at 2 a.m. thinking, clearly, that I had exactly one number in my phone I could call if I needed someone to come sit with Emma so Mark and I could both be there. It was Aunt Pam's number. It was still Aunt Pam's number. And every February, quietly, in the background of all of it, a card still went out to Larkspur Lane. Every March or April, it still came back. Small renovation work turned into larger renovation work, mostly because I underbid nobody and overpromised nothing, and word travels fast in a county where everybody's cousin knows somebody. By 2021, I had 4 employees and a real office instead of a kitchen table covered in invoices. By 2023, we'd won the bid on the Foundry Street project, 22 residential units above street-level retail, my first real ground-up development, the kind of contract that either makes a small company or quietly breaks it. It nearly broke at once. 6 weeks in, a steel delivery got held up for 11 days over a supplier dispute that had nothing to do with us, and I had 2 subcontractor crews sitting idle on my dime while I made calls every morning trying to find an alternate source. We absorbed it. We finished on schedule anyway, 6 weeks under the original budget projection, largely because I'd built that cushion in after 2018 without even planning for this exact scenario. A reporter for a regional trade publication called Heartland Business Weekly wrote a 2-page profile that fall, the Grove City contractor who grew a truck bed business into a 14-person firm. There was a photo of me on site in a hard hat, standing in front of the Foundry Street sign. My maiden name was right there in the headline, Ashford. The reporter asked me, near the end of the interview, what I thought had made the difference between the truck and the 14 employees. I told her it was mostly boring, showing up on time, writing everything down, never promising a completion date I hadn't actually calculated. She seemed a little disappointed that there wasn't a better answer. There wasn't. 9 years of paying close attention to details other people skip is not a dramatic story, until suddenly it is. I didn't think about who might see the article. I wasn't hiding from anyone. I also wasn't advertising. Aunt Pam called me 2 weeks after that article ran and told me, carefully, that someone from Frank's church had shown it to my mother, proud, the way people get proud of things they had nothing to do with. A few days later, Kayla sent me a friend request on Facebook, the first contact from her in over a decade. I sat on it for almost a week before I accepted, not sure yet what it meant. Then, on a Tuesday evening in late June, a voicemail came in from a number still saved in my phone as Mom Larkspur, even though I deleted the contact photo years earlier. Hi, Clara, it's your mother. A pause, like she wasn't sure the introduction was necessary. I saw the article. That's really something. I'd love to catch up sometime when you get a chance. Give me a call. I didn't call back. A second voicemail came 10 days after that. A little warmer, a little more specific. She asked about the kids by name, Emma and Josh, names she'd have had to get from Kayla, since she'd never met either of them. I noticed that. I noticed a lot of things, quietly, the way I always had. 3 weeks after that second voicemail, on the morning of my birthday, she knocked on the door of my office. She sat across from my desk with her coffee going cold, and she walked me through it. Frank's bypass, $31,000 for the rehab facility, $18,000 for the specialist in Columbus, the mortgage $12,400 behind. A repair on the Buick she mentioned almost as an afterthought. $84,000 altogether. She said, family helps family, for the second time. Then she said the thing that made me stand up and walk to the shelf behind me. I know things weren't perfect, she said, but I never stopped thinking about you. I brought the shoebox to the desk and laid the envelopes out in a row, in order by year, the way I'd always kept them. 9 of them. Blue ink on the first 5, black on the last 4, because I'd switched pens somewhere along the way without noticing. Her handwriting on every single one, that same slanted capital R. One torn and taped, the yellow postal sticker still on it. One stamp no longer at this address, from a house she never left. She picked up the torn one, looked at it for a long moment, set it back down without opening it, because she already knew what was inside. That was a hard time, she said. So was every year after that, I said. There was a knock at the office door right then. Denise, apologizing, saying the Foundry Street inspector was on line 2 and it would take 30 seconds. I told her I'd call back. My mother sat there in the pause, coat still on, and I realized she still hadn't taken it off, 9 minutes into a conversation in a heated room. You could have just called, she said quietly, nodding at the envelopes. Told me you were upset. I did call, I said. For about 6 years. You changed your number twice. She didn't argue that point, because she couldn't. Aunt Pam had told me, years earlier, about a conversation where my mother admitted, almost in passing, that she changed her number after the 3rd card came back and I tried calling instead. She said it in the context of Frank wanting a fresh start, but the timing wasn't a coincidence, and both of us in that office knew it. She tried again, said something about Frank not wanting reminders around the house, said something about needing space, about thinking I'd understand eventually, about how hard those years had been for her too. None of it was an apology. All of it was an explanation for why an apology wasn't necessary. I don't need you to explain the 9 years, I told her. I needed you to open just one of them. One time out of 9 tries. That was the whole ask. It was never about money until this morning, when suddenly it was only about money. She didn't have an answer for that. She looked at the envelopes for a while longer, then gathered her Kroger bag of folders, said she hadn't meant for it to go like this, and left without finishing the coffee. I didn't give her $84,000. I want to be honest that it wasn't a dramatic refusal. I didn't raise my voice, and I didn't ask her to leave. I told her, before she walked out, that I'd need to see the actual hospital billing and the actual notice from the bank before I'd consider paying any provider directly, and that I wasn't going to hand cash to someone who'd sent back 9 years of mine unopened. She never followed up with documentation. I never heard the number 84,000 again. Mark and I talked about it that night at our own kitchen table after the kids were in bed. He asked if I felt good about how I'd handled it. I told him I didn't feel much of anything yet, which was probably the most honest answer I'd had in 9 years. What did happen, a few months later, was smaller and better than anything I could have planned for. Kayla called, not texted, called, and told me she'd been 14 when all of this started, and that she remembered watching it happen and never understanding why nobody said anything, and that she was sorry she hadn't been the one to say it. We've had coffee twice since. It's not close. It's honest, which is more than I had before. Aunt Pam still calls every Sunday, the way she has since I was 19. I stopped counting that as a small thing a long time ago. Frank recovered. I heard through Kayla that the house stayed in foreclosure proceedings for a while before they worked something out with the bank on their own. I didn't ask for details, and nobody offered them. Emma is 9 now, old enough to ask questions, and a few weeks after the visit she found the shoebox while looking for tape in my office closet. She asked whose handwriting was on the envelopes. I told her it was her grandmother's, and that sometimes grown-ups don't get to have grandmothers the way other kids do, and that this was one of those times. She didn't push for more than that. She just asked if she could draw something to put in the box too, and taped a picture of the 4 of us, Mark, Josh, her and me, to the inside of the lid. It's still there. This past February, I didn't send a card. It wasn't a punishment. It's that I finally understood what those 9 envelopes had actually been for. Not proof that I was hoping she'd change. Proof, for myself, that I never stopped being someone who tried. I don't need to keep proving that to anyone anymore. The shoebox is still on the shelf if I ever forget. Some people don't come back because they missed you. They come back because they finally heard you were worth coming back for. Those are 2 very different reasons, and only one of them deserves a second chance. If someone disappeared from your life when you had nothing, and only came back once you had something, would you let them back in? And if you would, what exactly would you need to see first before you did? If this one hit close to home, tell me in the comments where you'd have drawn the line. And if you want more stories like this, the quiet kind, the kind that win with paperwork instead of shouting, subscribe, because there's a new one every week.